All right, this next one is definitely an example of at least what I want to have happen a bit more with my Twitch channel and my React channel is following the development of other games that I find interesting. Stempec, thank you. The main game that I do find interesting is Ashes. So this is The Scope Creep Begins from Narc.
What are you beasts?
Does this guy ever wear pants?
Hey, what up, boys? So, scope creep, pretty dangerous word to use for Kickstarter projects. And
what was the point of the beginning, though? I'm so confused.
As the newest map reveals has turned a lot of heads, it's also raised a lot of concerns. Concerns for the dreaded Kickstarter kryptonite known as scope creep. And
yes. So the last video that we watched of him, he made fun of Star Citizen for having so much scope creep, I believe. And the map he's talking about is the Ashes of Creation map grew by 3 times the size since they last talked about it. But then they made nodes bigger. It sounded like it was more of a balancing idea and made sense to me. Player housing, large, maybe larger servers. You need more room for player housing, things like that. There's sub nodes and all these other things. So
in today's video,
I want to
talk to you about this because I think it's important to clear the air. Scope creep has pretty much killed every single Kickstarter MMORPG. Apart from the ones that are so lame they have nothing to actually creep from. But
what game is that?
This, our patrons and I would love for you to grab yourself a Coca-Cola, because there's a divide, a split between the players, the doomers and pessimists claiming this is clearly scope creep, and the copium addicts desperately trying to convince themselves that this game is not Star Citizen 2.0, but I don't think it's quite as simple as this.
I mean, it's got to be scary to go through Alpha 1, and one of the key takeaways that was really, really good about Alpha 1, I didn't play it, unfortunately, but I do have an Alpha 2 key, is that the network performance was really good. So the game wasn't there, the game wasn't quite there yet, or at all, but the performance and the networking was on point. And then you grow the map and make it larger. What happens then? Right? That would be my concern. And that was my, I was really 3 times the size?
No, my friends. I may be high on the copium myself, but I am but your harbinger. I do not take the same level dose that you guys do. Because it wouldn't be right for someone of my professional standards to be high on the job, would it, lads? Now, with all that bollocks out of the way, let's begin, shall we?
Okay, so what is scope creep?
What is scope creep? To most of you copium addicts already 3K deep in Kickstarter scams, this word probably strikes fear in your hearts, but for the rest of you perfectly sane viewers, it probably sounds like gobbledygook. Well, let's begin today's video by discussing what scope creep actually is with some prime examples. And I think you guys know where I'm going with that. Scope creep is quite simple. It's when games, generally these Kickstarters, have completely undershot their features and need to expand to flesh out content, systems, and mechanics. This can be compared to updates we see in expansions to our currently popular MMORPGs. However, the major difference is when we pledge to Kickstarters, we're pledging under the impression that what's on the screen is what we're pledging to. We're putting our money down on the original scope of the game at its funding phase, and anything added after the funding is complete can safely be considered scope creep. A great example of a game ruined by scope creep is, of course, Star Citizen. I don't even think the mega whales would deny that, and Star Citizen is widely known to be in a perpetual alpha state due to the...
I've spent way too much money on this game, and I mean, being a creator for the game is really the only reason I spent the money on the game, but fair. The scope creep is insane. We were talking about it this morning on Discord. Like, the incessant need for lack of loading screens and all this stuff literally killed the game.
Scope creep it's implemented. Obviously don't know the details of this game's development, as I'm not into black market level copium dealing. Strictly ethical doses on this channel, so it would be wrong of me to make assumptions and guesses to what was actually expanded beyond the original concept of this game. Hey,
every single thing, everything, not a single thing was not expanded on, not only beyond the scope of the original Kickstarter, but far beyond the scope of the original Kickstarter, to the point where they don't, I'm convinced they don't even know what they're making anymore. Like, that's just where I'm at with this game. It's insane.
The trigger words in the title brought in a few of you Star Citizen cut boys in to enlighten us, but there is no denying a lot of parallels get made between Ashes of Creation and Star Citizen. However, the games are very, very different in terms of scope and obviously in terms of development time. Star Citizen started 10 years ago and is still in a state of falling through the world at every possible moment, and Ashes of Creation...
Not true, but close.
Well, Ashes of Creation is basically vaporware, but it is important to note that back in 2018, when the Kickstarter concluded, their stretch goals were met and have been solidified in stone ever since. It has been 5 years since then, and they've not expanded the scope of this game at all until today.
Yeah.
So that brings us to...
And I think the last video that I reacted to on this channel, I talked about why I'm interested in this game, and it was literally because they stuck to their Kickstarter plans. And then they made this map update, and it's like, oh no.
Now, 5 years later, Alpha 2
How did I just
imminent,
get into the same
and all of a
thing?
sudden, boom!
Oh, by the way, guys, we tripled the size of the world map.
It's not a good look, but is it really as simple as we tripled the size of the world map? Well, I'm not so sure. So let's engage in a Narc special and baselessly speculate, doing mental gymnastics to convince ourselves our money hasn't been spent on Steven's 5th yacht. So by definition, scope creep is defined thusly. Scope creep, also called requirement creep or kitchen sink syndrome, in project management
Yeah, kitchen sink means you throw everything at the game, and including the kitchen sink. It's an American phrase, I think.
refers to changes, continuous or uncontrolled growth in a project scope at any point after the project begins. This can occur when the scope of a project is not properly defined, documented, or controlled. It is generally considered harmful and is
And this is where I think is the biggest issue with Star Citizen, and I thought was the biggest success with Ashes of Creation, is the scope of the project in Ashes was properly defined, documented, and seemed under control, where Star Citizen, the backers do not know what the scope of the project is. It is not documented at all, and it is completely out of control. I think it's way more under control than it's ever been, but that definition right there is like the problem and has always been the problem with communication, expectation setting, and everything around Star Citizen for me, versus, you know, why I found this project to be interesting on so many levels. I always played kind of fantasy MMORPG style games. That's what I liked. I liked kind of the features in this game, and Star Citizen, I don't know what the scope is. I don't know what the features even are
Related,
going to be.
but not distinct from feature creep, because feature creep refers to features. Obviously, what are you, retarded? So does a map being increased in size 3 times over fall under this definition? Out of context to outside eyes, aka most people that are not indeed batshit insane, yeah, it probably does. However, I'm here to explain why it's actually not, and this isn't just code, guys. I swear there's some pretty hard facts and logic to back this up, and we'll start with a clip from the big man himself.
The plan had to change, and it had to change because there's nothing more important than being in the engine, building those things and feeling those things out, right? And our level design team, in building Alpha 2 and prepping for Alpha 2, we've been defining that density, that content density in the world. And it required that we made the map a bit bigger.
You see, when there's a project as big and ambitious as Ashes of Creation, it's very common to have a general concept, but in practice, things don't always turn out the way they originally planned. Does this imply changes made to accommodate this count as scope creep? It could in certain situations where a project isn't meticulously planned out during concept, but I don't think Ashes of Creation falls into that category. Just by reading the wiki and seeing how interlinked every mechanic is in this MMORPG, it's pretty clear years of planning and thought have gone into it. To the node system, to the class design, oceans, and economy, you'll be hard-pressed to not find an answer to any concerns you have with this game's design. You know, except balancing the 64 classes and meta guides sucking out the fun, or PvP griefing cannibalizing the game, or day 1 bottlenecking or economy breaking exploits, or server stagnation and player population. But aside from all that, the game's gonna be perfect. Right?
Right?
Which brings us to why. Why did these changes occur? Well, first of all, the majority of the map size increase is affecting the size of the oceans. Most of this is obviously going to be flat nothingness, a staging ground for PvP, as they revealed this month that the open waters will indeed be open PvP. You're a great change, and one we'll be discussing in the next video, so subscribe, you pathetic excuses for shipmates, scrub the decks, ring the bell, and make sure to check out my Patreon for additional
So it's Arcade. Yeah. So the main guy who made this game, and like, for most people are probably just so high on Star Citizen Copium they don't even know what other games are. The guy who makes this game, the head guy who you heard talking about the size of the map, he played Arcade and loved Arcade and was so upset with the way the devs treated Arcade that he essentially wanted to make an Arcade without pay to win. Like, that was his goal the entire time, was to make an Arcade that isn't pay to win. That's it.
The other major point of this is the density of the world. To put it simply, Steven explained after their initial testing, the world felt too compact. There just wasn't enough content in between the nodes to fit their planned content as they grew to village stage and beyond. It felt like an urban landscape, he exclaimed, and you can probably imagine what that means. Not having enough breathing room, running from city to city within a matter of seconds would certainly feel odd for a fantasy MMORPG.
Really? Because I watched, okay, so like, there's one guy who posts on YouTube, because I'm trying to catch up on this game. I'm trying to catch up for what happened in Alpha 1. It looked like there was a decent amount of running. There's no fast travel in the game, I don't think. So I didn't get that vibe, but I wonder what has happened since. And I would imagine if you had player housing that it would start to get a little... Yeah, they were running, I mean, even on mounts.
Reconsideration of scale was not enough to sate Steven's desire for godhood, for he would further bend the design to his will, reducing the total amount of nodes down from 103 to 85, freeing up a considerable amount of space that 23 nodes would have taken up. This, alongside the increased landmass, is a giant positive for the overall...
I guess, like, all the in-between spaces, resource gathering area, player housing, and so on, right? Like, I mean, I sincerely, like, I still haven't quite learned a lot about the housing. I want to, because I come from Ultima Online, and that was what I loved the most about it, was the housing market, the real estate, and all that, and how important that was to the game.
Game's design. Not only are we getting access to a massive open ocean, but the trade routes for caravans, the space for dungeons, and the questing locations in the world all have enough space now to feel meaningful and immersive. However, does this increase in map size affect the time it takes for Ashes of Creation to land in our grubby little hands? Well,
No,
I think
cities.
this rather controversial question has a rather controversial answer, and you know me, guys, I love me some controversy, so let's farm some dislikes by saying something nobody wants to hear. I do indeed think this change will affect the overall development time for Ashes of Creation. Even though the
I
node
think it would
structure is
actually
a
speed
very
it up.
controlled change, I think it is indeed a necessary one. One of my major concerns for this project is a concern I had with Arcade. As you can see from the footage in the background, Arcade had these very, how'd you put it? Dog shit zones that were just pure emptiness to compensate for things like housing locations, and I think Steven and the team are very aware of this issue. They were completely and utterly immersion breaking, and because they talk about density, I'm positive this will not be a concern. It's important to remember Ashes is largely
I believe they built the map out to compensate for player housing.
featuring sandbox elements with a lot of curated content in between, and this change was necessary for that goal to be achieved. Concepts like this can be speculated all they want, but without seeing it working in game, it's impossible to know how it will end up. The turning point for this game is now, as these changes have set in stone internally its systems, mechanics, and world, and by God, I'm genuinely excited to see the Ranger showcase at the end of this month.
How can you say that things are set in stone when you just saw them move in one update at the end of the month? That, like, usually I think Narc is like really balanced, like jokes about being high on copium and all those things, but is like actually pretty much there. How can you say that when they literally just changed the scope of the game entirely?
Only 4 more weeks to So let's end today's video with a question for you, my dear viewer. Is scope creep that is designed to fix conceptual problems actually considered a negative or a positive? Instead of attempting to influence your answer with one of my own, I think the poor sods over at Intrepid who need to review my videos would get more of a kick reading through your copium-fueled answers. However, before I conclude, I just want to say I always predicted that some form of scope creep was going to happen during this project's development. I've had this video stuck in my never-ending supply of thin air for months now, but it seems Steven explained it better than I ever could. So again, if anyone missed this month's livestream, I implore you to make the time to watch it, because it completely changed my perception on how close Alpha 2 really is. But as usual, I am just one nerd desperate for a good MMO, and my opinions mean nothing without yours in the comments below. And well, I'm not interested in the side of the
But Narc, you're bald, homeless, degenerate, you're blinded, and I say nothing but the truth. Pantheon is still better at every point.
And to that I say, listen, kid, if you think vague, unnecessary class changes during a PowerPoint presentation is showing off core mechanics, then you need to tell us where you get your supply from, because you're high on copium.
He just shits on Pantheon at the end of every video. Oh no. No, his videos are good. I just that would be like the first sign of like a little bit of oh no when I look at Ashes. I'm really excited for it. I think it's kind of what I'm looking for in an MMO, and it's hopefully going to deliver. I got my Alpha 2 key, and we'll see what happens whenever it happens.